Dust clung to the hem of her skirt as Eloise Whittaker stepped down from the stagecoach, one gloved hand clutching a worn valise, the other shielding her eyes from the sharp sun. The dirt road stretched in both directions, flanked by squat wooden buildings with shingled signs swaying in the wind. She took a breath, shallow and dry. This was it, her new beginning. She had read about Willow Creek in every letter he'd sent. A quiet town nestled between hills and cottonwood trees. A bakery with a painted door, a chapel with bells that rang on Sunday, and a house with a porch swing where she'd spend quiet evenings with the man who said he wanted her heart. He signed his name in thick, bold ink, Bradley Sharp. Eloise stood straight, back stiffened with pride more than posture. She had not come west to be pitied. She had come to build something true. She smoothed her skirt and waited, expecting to see a man approach, flowers maybe, or just a kind smile. But the platform emptied. The driver tipped his hat and rolled off. Behind her, chickens scattered from a boy's shout. No one called her name. No one stepped forward. She waited until the sun angled low and shadows stretched across the ground. Her stomach ached from hours without food, her feet throbbed in shoes too small, bought second-hand to look presentable. Still, she didn't cry. She'd done enough of that back east, when her father's debts left her motherless and near homeless, the last of their silver pawned for the ticket west. She approached the general store, where the scent of cinnamon and leather mingled, and an older woman behind the counter glanced up with curiosity. "I'm looking for Bradley Sharp," Eloise said, forcing a smile. The woman pursed her lips. "Bradley? He was in town yesterday. You his kin?" "No, ma'am. I'm his." Eloise hesitated, cheeks warming. "His intended." The woman's brows lifted. "Oh." That O stretched between them like a taut clothesline, thin and dangerous. "I'm sure he'll be along," Eloise offered, but the woman had already returned to her ledger. By nightfall, hunger overtook pride. She bought a small apple and a heel of bread with what little she had left and sat beneath the awning of the post office, waiting. She stared at the chapel across the way. The bell was silent. Footsteps finally echoed across the planks, sharp and deliberate. A tall man in a dust-streaked waistcoat approached, flanked by the scent of sweat and horses. "You Eloise?" he asked, voice flat. She stood, breath catching. "Yes." "Bradley." He looked her up and down, mouth twisting into something between amusement and disappointment. "Huh. Figured you'd be different." She blinked. "I don't understand." He stepped closer, the tension rising like a barbed wire fence. "You made yourself sound real fine in those letters. Pretty words. Thought maybe I was gettin' a lady." "I am a lady," she said too fast. "Not lookin' for a fight, miss," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Thing is, I changed my mind. Got no use for a woman with no family, no money, and no land. Figured I'd try something else. You can take the next coach back east." "I can't," she whispered. "I don't have a home to go back to." "That ain't my problem." He turned and walked off, just like that. No apology. No explanation. She stood frozen, the dusk settling into her skin. Behind her, a door creaked open. The woman from the store watched from her threshold, arms crossed. But no one said anything. No one offered a place to sleep or even a cup of water. She made her way toward the edge of town as the moon climbed, trembling hands cradling the valise. She passed the chapel, where warm candlelight flickered behind the windows, then past a livery stable where a dog barked at her presence. The ground grew uneven, the air colder. At last, she found an abandoned wagon, unhitched and still, as if forgotten by time. It sat near a thicket of pines, its canvas torn but clean inside. She climbed in, tucking her skirts beneath her and resting the valise beneath her head. Her fingers clutched the locket at her neck, a plain thing, no picture inside. The stars blinked above her, indifferent. She did not cry. She simply lay there, her body still, heart stunned by how quickly hope could turn to shame. The sun woke her. Pale gold, like mercy spilling over the hills. She stirred, aware of footsteps nearby. Not the heavy march of lawmen, but something slower. Careful. A man stood beside the wagon, arms crossed. He looked to be in his 30s, with hair like river mud and a day's stubble on his jaw. His shirt was patched at the elbows, boots dust-covered and worn. Behind him, 2 children, no older than 6, peeked from behind his legs. A boy and a girl. She sat up, lips cracked. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean, I just needed." "I know whose wagon this is," he said. "Mine." Her eyes widened. "Please don't. I had nowhere else to go. I'll leave now, just give me a moment." He studied her. "Didn't say you had to leave." The girl tugged at his sleeve. "Papa, is she a fairy?" His brow lifted. "She's a woman who looks hungry." The boy clutched a piece of bread. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and offered it to her. Eloise blinked, overcome by the smallest kindness she'd received in days. She took the bread with shaking hands. "Thank you." The man gave a nod. "Name's Thomas Grady. That's Sarah. That one's Ben." She pressed a hand to her chest. "Eloise Whittaker." He looked at her a moment longer, then said, "Come have breakfast. Got some eggs and coffee. You can tell me your story, or not. Your choice." She hesitated, every instinct trained for suspicion. But then Sarah smiled, and Ben giggled at a passing butterfly, and Eloise realized she had been seen not as scandal, or charity, or burden, but simply as a person. She climbed down slowly, her body sore, her spirit threadbare. Thomas didn't offer her a future. He didn't offer her protection. He simply offered her a meal. And after all she had lost, it felt like the kindest thing in the world. She followed them toward a small cabin nestled behind the trees, smoke curling gently from the chimney. And in the distance, the chapel bell finally rang. Eloise stirred the fire slowly, the iron poker warm in her hand, smoke coiling into the rafters of Thomas Grady's modest cabin. The hearth crackled with damp wood, casting flickers across the plank floor and over the 2 sleeping children curled beneath quilts stitched from memory and wear. It had been 3 days since she'd awakened in his wagon, 3 days since he'd offered her eggs and silence instead of judgment. He hadn't asked many questions, only motioned to the garden that needed weeding and to the shirts needing mending, as if her hands already belonged to the work. She hadn't expected to stay. She told herself she'd leave once her strength returned, once she found a way to earn back enough coins for another start. But the days kept folding into one another, softly, quietly. There was always something that needed doing, and somehow she fit inside the quiet rhythm of the Grady home like a missing piece no one had realized was missing. Still, the town hadn't forgotten who she was, or rather, who she wasn't. At the general store, conversations stilled when she entered. One woman whispered, shameless, beneath her breath as Eloise passed, her hands full of flour and salt. A shop boy gave her change without meeting her eye. In church, she sat at the end of a pew, alone, hymnal unopened. No one asked her name. No one offered theirs. By contrast, Sarah and Ben clung to her like roots to earth. Sarah, all curls and mischief, followed her from kitchen to coop, asking endless questions. Ben, quiet and brooding, softened in her presence, sitting beside her while she darned socks, occasionally brushing his shoulder against hers like a barn cat. They asked no questions about where she came from, only what kind of pies she could bake, and whether she knew stories about stars. Thomas remained a quiet figure, neither distant nor close, watching her with eyes like river stone, deep, unreadable, kind. He never presumed, never crowded her. She noticed the way his shoulders hunched from years of labor, the way he looked out the window before speaking, as though checking the horizon for ghosts. A man stitched together by grief and grit. Late one afternoon, Eloise hung laundry between 2 posts while clouds gathered low in the sky. The wind lifted the linens, snapping them like sails. Her hands were chapped, her shoulders sore, but she felt calm. Purpose had taken root where shame had once bloomed. Just as she reached for another sheet, a voice cut through the wind. "Well, I'll be. So it's true. She froze. Bradley Sharp stood at the edge of the yard, one boot planted, the other grinding into the dirt. He wore a dark coat too fine for the dust, and his smile was a blade. "Didn't believe it when I heard. You playing house with a widower now?" he sneered, glancing at the laundry flapping like flags of surrender. "Didn't take long." She stepped forward, heart thudding. "You have no right to be here." "Don't I? I paid for your ticket, didn't I?" "You owe me." "I owe you nothing," she said, voice shaking. "You rejected me. In front of half the town. You were mine to begin with," he growled, stepping closer. "People like you don't get to choose." Before she could answer, a shadow passed across the yard. Thomas stood at the cabin door, arms folded, jaw tight. He said nothing at first, only looked at Bradley as though measuring him in silence. "You have business here?" he asked finally, voice low. Bradley shifted. "Just collecting what's mine." Thomas's eyes didn't leave him. "She ain't yours. And if you have a complaint, you can take it up with the sheriff." Bradley scoffed. "So she's yours now? That it?" Thomas stepped down from the porch, boots pressing firmly into the earth. "She's her own. That's enough." Bradley lingered, his pride unwilling to shrink in the face of a man who didn't raise his voice. But after a moment, he spit in the dirt and turned. "She's not worth it. You'll see." When he was gone, Eloise found herself trembling, not with fear, but with the slow dawning truth that someone had stood between her and the past and didn't ask anything in return. Thomas turned to go back inside. "There's stew," he said. "Come in before it gets cold." That evening, as the fire crackled and the children slept between them, Eloise held the ladle in her hand longer than she needed to. "Why did you defend me?" Thomas didn't look up. "Because I saw how he looked at you. Like you were something to own. And I've buried enough to know the difference." Her eyes softened. "Buried? My wife. Consumption took her. Took most of the light with her. I've been trying to raise these two ever since." Eloise nodded. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Life's sorry, not you." They fell into quiet again, but something had shifted. A thread had been tied between them, not romance, not yet, but recognition. The following days brought rain and with it the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. The roof leaked above the pantry, and Thomas spent a morning patching it while Eloise baked pies with bruised apples donated by the store clerk who could no longer meet her gaze. She didn't care. She had a purpose, and it tasted of cinnamon and determination. She sold the pies at the Sunday market. She embroidered napkins for a woman who never thanked her. She hemmed trousers for a man who pretended not to know her name. She did it all without complaint because it built something. Not a reputation, not quite yet, but a life. One morning, Sarah handed her a crumpled bouquet of clover and wild mint. "It's for you," she said, beaming. "Papa says you smell like hope." Eloise knelt, tears pricking her eyes. "Does he now?" That night, Thomas left a book by her door, a worn volume of poetry. Inside the cover, in small, careful handwriting, "Thought you might like this. T." She traced the letters with her fingertip. Not a gift. Not a gesture to impress. Just something chosen, thoughtfully. It stirred something deep and unfamiliar in her chest. Still, the town held its distance. At Sunday service, the preacher's wife moved her hymnal when Eloise sat beside her. A child was pulled away by her mother's sharp hand as Eloise passed. But the fire inside her no longer flickered as it once had. She carried herself with quiet grace, head high, back straight, even when the whispers followed her down the aisle. One afternoon, as she walked home with a basket of eggs nestled in cloth, she passed the same woman who once hissed, "Fallen." The woman paused, her baby fussy in her arms, a sack of flour tipping from her grasp. Without hesitation, Eloise stepped forward, caught the sack, steadied the child. Their eyes met. A beat of silence. "Thank you," the woman said, voice small. Eloise only nodded and walked on. Later that evening, she stood outside the cabin watching the horizon blush with sunset. Thomas joined her, leaning against the porch rail. I heard about the flower, he said. It was nothing. No, he said gently. It was Grace. They watched the light fade into dusk, the trees whispering secrets in the wind. She turned to him, voice soft. I think I'm not afraid anymore. He looked at her then, not just at her face, but into it. You never were, he said. You just forgot. In that quiet, in the hush between words, Eloise felt the world shift, not loudly, not suddenly, but like snow melting on warm stone. The past had not undone her. The town had not broken her. And as the last light disappeared behind the hills, she realized, she was still here. And she was not leaving. The garden began to grow beneath her hands. It was nothing remarkable, just crooked rows of turnips and squash, a scattering of herbs in a sun-warmed box by the window, but each seed she tucked into the soil felt like a promise. A promise that life could begin again in small, trembling ways. Eloise worked early, often before the children woke. She liked the hush of morning, the cool air, the way her thoughts moved more clearly in the quiet. Thomas would nod to her from the barn, shirt rolled to the elbows, face still soft from sleep. He never lingered, never hovered. He simply passed her a tin mug of coffee before walking on, and somehow that silent exchange became part of her day. Like breath, like prayer. She didn't realize how often she smiled now, how easily laughter came when Sarah sang nonsense songs in the coop or when Ben invented stories about brave mice and grumpy cows. She cooked meals without fear they'd be criticized. She stitched without trembling. Her body moved with purpose, no longer taut with shame. Still, the world hadn't forgotten. At the mercantile, she overheard a man murmur, "That Grady's got a soft spot for strays." The clerk eyed her plain dress and murmured, "She plays meek now. Just wait." Thomas never addressed it. Neither did she. But one afternoon she found a note tucked between the pages of her poetry book. "They don't know you. Let them talk. I see you." She stared at the words for a long time. The writing was neat, slanted. The ink faint where the nib had faltered, as if he'd hesitated. She touched the page with reverence and read it again. That night, she brought out a jar of wildflower honey she'd been saving and spread it on biscuits fresh from the oven. She placed them on the table without comment. When Thomas bit into one, his eyes widened slightly. He said nothing, but the next day, he sharpened her sewing shears without being asked. That became the language between them. No confessions, no declarations. Just acts, quiet, deliberate, and offered with care. When a late frost killed half the cabbage crop, Eloise found Thomas in the barn, cursing under his breath as he examined the ruined plants. She stepped beside him, her breath misting in the cold air. "I'll pickle what we can save," she said softly. "And maybe the grocer still has some seed. We can try again." He looked at her, not as a woman offering pity, but as someone who refused to bow to disappointment. "You really think we'll get anything to grow again?" "Yes," she said simply. "Everything wants to live." He let out a soft breath and nodded. "Then we'll plant more." And they did. In the weeks that followed, she saw sides of him she hadn't expected. How he sang under his breath while repairing the fence. How he built Sarah a toy horse from scrap wood, painting its eyes with startling tenderness. How he let Ben sit in silence on his knee for whole hours, no words exchanged, only the sound of wood being whittled and the slow pulse of presence. Eloise began keeping a little notebook by her bedside. Not a diary. Just words she liked. Phrases. Descriptions of days that felt too lovely to forget. One page simply read, "His hands are rough, but they move like they remember softness." On a rare warm evening, Thomas suggested they take supper outside. They sat on the porch steps, passing plates of roast potatoes and carrots, the children chasing fireflies in the yard. The stars blinked awake one by one. Sarah fell asleep on Eloise's lap, Ben curled beside his father. Thomas sipped from a chipped cup. "You miss the city?" She shook her head. "No. I miss who I thought I could be in it." But she was always too quiet to be heard. He nodded slowly. Seems to me you speak plenty loud now. She smiled, brushing a curl from Sarah's brow. Only because no one here talks over me. He watched her a long moment. They don't see what I see. What do you see? He didn't answer right away. Then, someone who doesn't scare easy. Someone who makes hard places feel softer. She felt the warmth in her chest bloom in quiet wonder. No one had ever said something like that to her. Not even in letters. Another week passed, and with it came the town's midsummer picnic. She hadn't planned on attending. She had no dress that fit quite right and no wish to endure the stairs. But Thomas set a folded note on the table the night before. Would mean a lot to Sarah if you came. We'll leave when you say. The next morning, she brushed her hair until it shone, pinned it back with a ribbon Sarah had found tangled in a bush, and slipped into a cream-colored dress that had once belonged to Thomas's late wife. He offered it to her gently, wordlessly, his eyes asking for grace. Eloise held her breath when she stepped into the clearing. The townsfolk gathered around long tables of food, laughter in the air. Some eyes turned her way. Some mouths whispered. But then Ben ran ahead shouting, "Miss Eloise brought pie," and Sarah grabbed her hand and tugged her forward. Thomas walked beside her, not touching, not claiming, but his presence was its own quiet shield. They ate, played games, laughed. Someone brought out a fiddle. Couples danced in the grass. The air smelled of lemon balm and fresh bread. Later, as dusk painted the sky, Thomas turned to her. "You dance?" he asked. She hesitated. "It's been years." His hand extended, open. "Then it's time." She placed her hand in his, and he pulled her gently into the center of the clearing. Others stepped aside, watching. He didn't lead with flourish. He didn't spin her or show off. He simply held her hand and moved in time with the music, one foot in front of the other, every motion respectful. Her heart beat in her throat. When the song ended, he didn't let go. She looked up at him, chest rising and falling. "Why are you doing this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because when I see you with them, with Sarah, with Ben, I remember what hope felt like. And when I sit beside you, I feel something calm that I haven't felt in years." She stepped closer, uncertain. "Do you want more than this?" "I want this," he said. "Whatever shape it takes. I don't need promises. I just want to keep building something with you." Eloise stood still, every part of her filled with quiet thunder. Not because she needed saving, but because she had been seen, entirely, and not once had he looked away. The world blurred around them, the laughter, the music, the light. For a moment it was only the two of them. She didn't answer with words. She only leaned her head against his shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was pretending to belong. She belonged. Somewhere in the dark, the fireflies began to dance. The morning of the harvest festival began with a hush, as though even the wind knew something sacred was unfolding. Dew clung to the wheat, sparkling under a sky brushed with pale gold. Eloise stood at the cabin's threshold, her shawl drawn close, eyes scanning the horizon. Sarah's giggles echoed from the barn as Ben chased her, his voice lighter than it had been in years. Thomas stood beside the wagon, fastening the crates of pies and preserves Eloise had baked through the week, apple, rhubarb, sweet potato, their crusts stamped with delicate leaves. His movements were steady, practiced, but his eyes kept finding hers. "You sure you're ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I've been hiding long enough." He didn't press her, didn't offer false comfort, just gave a short nod and held out his hand to help her into the wagon. She took it without hesitation. By midday, the town square had transformed into a patchwork of color and sound. Lanterns swayed overhead, and long tables groaned beneath platters of roast pork, corn fritters, and jellied peaches. Fiddles and banjos tuned in the background, while children raced past with red ribbons trailing from their hair and wrist. As Eloise stepped down from the wagon, the air shifted. Eyes turned toward her. Conversations slowed, then resumed in quiet murmurs. Some faces looked away. Others narrowed. A few, just a few, softened. But she didn't falter. She carried the first pie to the table herself, setting it gently beside the others. Then she turned and looked around, chin lifted, shoulders square. Sarah and Ben flanked her like sentries. A group of women stood by the quilting display, one of them, the preacher's wife, tilting her head as Eloise passed. "I see the Grady widow's dress still fits," she said, just loud enough. Thomas's voice came behind her, level and low. "I offered it. Seemed ashamed to let something lovely gather dust." The preacher's wife opened her mouth, then closed it. Eloise turned toward Thomas. "Thank you," she whispered. He only nodded, as if it were nothing, though the set of his jaw suggested otherwise. As the afternoon wore on, she began to feel the edges soften. Children came for slices of pie. A young couple asked if she'd share her recipe. An older man tipped his hat and thanked her for the pickled beet. Each moment chipped away at the wall the town had built around her. When the fiddle struck up a lively reel, Sarah tugged her hand. "Dance with me." "I don't dance much, sweetheart." "Then sway," Ben said from her side. "That's all dancing really is." So she did. She swayed, first with Sarah, then with Ben, laughter warming her ribs. For a moment she forgot the stairs, the past, even Bradley Sharp's bitter words still lingering in memory like the ghost of a bruise. She only remembered joy. When the music slowed, Thomas stepped forward. His hat in his hands, voice gentle. "May I?" She froze. All around, the crowd hushed, as if the question held more weight than it should. But Thomas waited, unflinching, offering her the choice she'd never been given. She reached out. They moved together, not with flourish or spectacle, but with the easy grace of people who had learned to carry grief without letting it drown them. His hand was warm at her back. Her fingers rested lightly in his. Around them, the town watched. But inside the circle they made, there was only calm. He leaned closer. "I used to think my life ended with her. That all I had left was duty and dust. And now?" she asked. "I think I was wrong," he said, voice rough. "Because every time I look at you, I remember something better than grief." Her breath caught. "I'm not what you expected," she said. "No," he replied. "You're more." The music faded. He didn't let go. "I don't need to own you or save you," he said, so softly only she could hear. "But I'd be proud to stand beside you, if you'd let me." The air thickened. Her heart surged. "I don't want a rescuer," she whispered. "Only someone who sees me as I am." "I do," he said. "Every part." The world quieted, holding its breath. And then, slowly, she leaned in and kissed him, not for the crowd, not to prove anything, but because there was nothing left to fear. When they stepped apart, the applause was quiet, respectful, and real. Not for a spectacle, for something earned. Later, as lanterns glowed and twilight settled like a sigh, Eloise stood near the tables, her hands warm from serving cider. A woman approached, the same one whose flour sack she'd saved weeks ago. The woman held out a jar of jam. "Made this. Fig and vanilla. Thought you might like it." Eloise took it, stunned. "Thank you." "I judged too quick," the woman said, eyes lowering. "Didn't see the whole story." "You weren't the only one," Eloise said. "But we all see clearer with time." As the woman walked away, Eloise felt something open in her chest. Not just healing, belonging. Thomas approached, Sarah asleep in his arms, her cheek pressed to his shoulder. Ben clung to his leg, blinking sleepily. "You ready?" Thomas asked. Eloise nodded. They walked together, slow and sure, down the lantern-lit road that led home. As the cabin came into view, Eloise looked up at the stars. They shimmered, unbothered by whispers, unchanged by judgment. She turned to Thomas. "You asked if I was ready this morning. I didn't answer." His brow furrowed gently. "No need. I'm ready now," she said. "For a life that isn't borrowed. For a home that isn't a hiding place." He looked at her, the kind of look that sees everything. "Then stay," he said. "As long as you want." I will. She reached for Ben's hand and carried Sarah into the house. Inside, the fire was still warm, the quilts neatly folded, the scent of apples and lavender lingering in the air. This time, she didn't wait to be invited to the table. She set the jam beside the honey, folded the shawl across the chair, and sat down beside Thomas as if she had always belonged there. Because now she did. And to you, reading this, if you've ever felt like a guest in your own life, like your story wasn't worth telling unless someone else approved it, remember Eloise. Remember how she was cast aside, and still offered grace. How she stood alone and still baked pies. How she faced a town that whispered, and still chose to love. So if the world calls you too much or not enough or anything in between, remember Eloise Grady and let your story bloom anyway.